While I was doing research for my PhD thesis on convent and prison spaces on Spanish film and television since the transition to democracy, I came across this article that really stood out to me. It's from El Socialista, and it's a report from 1918 that describes an incident at a Madrid Inclusa, where mothers whose children were being cared for by the nuns inside the building came to ask to visit those kids and bring them some presents, but were told that they couldn't see them. Bourne writes that incluso hubo una monja que contestó que los niños esos no pertenecen ya a sus madres, sino a la inclusa. Sin darse cuenta, esa monjita reflejó en sus palabras frías y crueles el espíritu atávico de todas las comunidades religiosas. This perception of nuns as the anti-mother is also reflected in Federico Garcia's article in Diario de Burgos in 1917. He writes that nuestras almas no pueden comprender ni comprenderán nunca a una monja enclaustrada. Son esencias rotas de amor y maternidad, que al encontrarse solas en el mundo se buscan unas a otras para convertirse en sombras en una tumba antigua. These articles really stood out to me because this situation, which El Socialista describes as atavistic in 1918, is actually key to how nuns and religious women more generally are portrayed in the media up until the present day. I've been using this timed graphic to create an interactive map of how religious women are portrayed on stage and screen over the last century. There are definitely trends that come and go. See, for example, the nunsploitation films of the late 1970s and the recent uptick in nuns and religious women as a trope in horror film. By far the most enduring trend is that of nun as mother. This narrative has been repeated ad nauseum over the last century, on film, on stage, in novels, and even in the media. Take, for example, Canción de Cuna. This story of a young orphan raised by nuns in a convent started life as a stage play in 1911 and was then made into a film in 1960 and 1994. Similarly, El Niño de las Monjas started life as a novel, became a stage play in 1923, a film in 1928, and again in 1958. This story tells of a young orphan boy raised in a convent who becomes a successful bullfighter. It recently made headlines once again as a stage narrative come to life, when bullfighter Jorge Perez came to fame, a real-life bullfighter who had been raised in a convent from childhood. While this is quite a genuinely heartwarming story, most depictions of nuns in the media and popular culture in recent years have focused on their role in the Niños Robados scandal. The rampant and institutionalised practice of child trafficking and illegal adoption facilitated by religious orders in Spain is widely understood to have begun with the Francoist regime in the late 1930s and continued until the early 1990s. However, my preliminary research, spurred on by that really fascinating El Socialista article, suggests that the seeds of this practice were sown much earlier, with the idea of nuns as appropriate caregivers to children superior to their biological mothers being normalised and even romanticised through the explosion in the 1920s and 30s of sentimental narratives like Canción de Cuna and El Niño de las Monjas, which revolved around the adoption of abandoned children by nuns. My new research project aims to identify and examine the representations of religious women in maternal roles on stage and screen from 1923 to 1936. The hope is that an analysis of these texts, particularly in how popular cultural texts like film and theatre contrast so starkly with media texts like the El Socialista article and Lorca's report on the convent of Burgos, can illuminate not only changing attitudes towards religious women, but help us to understand the development of societal attitudes towards mothers and motherhood in Spain's turbulent 20th century. So I'm really sorry I can't be with you today, but hopefully next year in WISPs at a different conference I'll be able to give you a more full report on the results of my research. But thanks so much for listening.